Section 18, and the Governor's February 18th, 2022 revised order extending remote participation by all members in any meeting of a public body. This meeting, the Great Barrington Select Board, will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information and general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and our parties with a right and a requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the town's website. No in-person attendance members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. Pursuant to MGL 7C 30A, Section 20F, after notifying the chair of the public body, any person may make a video or audio recording of an open session of a meeting of a public body or may transmit the meeting through any medium. Beginning of the meeting, the chair shall inform other attendees of any such recordings. This meeting is being recorded by the Berkshire Edge, the Berkshire Eagle, the Town of Great Barrington, and other members of the public. Any member of the public wishing to speak at the meeting must receive permission of the chair. The listing of agenda items are those reasonably anticipated by the chair, which may be discussed at the meeting. Not all items listed may in fact be discussed, and other items not listed may be brought up for discussion to the extent permitted by law. So a little housekeeping, just because there was a little bit of confusion. This meeting has no discussion by select board on short-term rentals. Our next discussion on short-term rentals will be this Wednesday night, March 30th. And then on Monday, April 4th, will be a listening session for the select board to listen to the public's comments. So if you're on the meeting tonight, you're welcome to stay, but we will not be having any discussion on short-term rentals, nor is it on the agenda. Start with the approval of minutes, March 7th, 2022. Do I have a motion?
I make a motion to approve the March 7th minutes.
Second.
Discussion.
I have a addition, please.
Yes.
Under previous business, under number 8, under the short-term rental, I wanted to add when it says C. Rembold work with L. Davis and E. Abrams in the best effort to revise the bylaw. Addition that it was decided that L. Davis and S. Bannon would be working together.
I'm missing the difference. I'm sorry.
So basically it says that I'm working with Ed, and it was decided after that the two of us would be working with Chris, and that's only
okay. You're correct. That's what it was a little confusing that night. Okay, we'll make that change. Ed, you're okay with that change?
Yeah, you can either just make the two of you, or I decline it. Either way, yeah.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, roll call vote. Garfield.
Aye.
Eric.
Aye.
Ed.
Yes.
Lee.
Yes.
And yes, it's unanimous for the minutes. Select board's announcements statement. Garfield.
Nothing.
Eric.
Nothing.
Ed. Lee.
Nothing.
And I have nothing. Town manager's report.
Thanks, Steve. Just a few quick ones this evening, and nothing new to report with Houstonic Waterworks. Although I did want to just remind everyone that they are required to respond to DEP's March 3rd order by Monday, April 4th. So we're awaiting a reply and a response there. I would, however, like to ask that this board schedule an executive session with our attorney to discuss our strategy. And I'd like to suggest Thursday, April 21st at 6 o'clock, if that works for your schedules.
Does that work for the select board?
I'm going to be out of town that week from the 19th to the, whatever it is, the following Monday, unfortunately.
Okay, so what we'll have to do is we'll have to go back to our lawyer and get some other dates, Mark, and we can do it by email. It's housekeeping. It's a schedule. So we will figure out other dates.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
No worries. I can circulate some other dates very shortly. Next on my list is an update on paving projects, and I have a long list here in front of me, so I'm just going to go through them quickly. So we have a number of paving projects that are resuming. Some of them were left over from last fall that we weren't able to complete on time before the weather became too cold. And some are spring projects that were already in the schedule for this year. So first on my list is Rossiter Street. You're going to see paving, drainage, and pedestrian paths get started over there very soon. Elm Court, just around the corner, paving and sidewalks there. The Fairview Terrace, Magnolia, and Maplewood neighborhood up off of Stockbridge Road, you'll see paving and pedestrian paths there as well. Route 71, from the Egremont line to the intersection of 23, you'll see paving and a little bit of widening over there also for pedestrians, just a little gravel on the side so that people walking along that strip have a safe place to do that. You'll see some sewer slip lining getting underway on Main Street very, very soon. That was delayed about a month ago because of the weather. You'll see year 2, and this is not only year 2, but the final year of construction at the roundabout getting started very soon too. That's the intersection of Route 7 and 23. You'll see work resume on the Route 7 trail up near CHP. And that will conclude construction this spring also. And that project should be opening very shortly. You'll see contractors getting started at the Division Street Bridge. And by contractors, I just mean that you're going to start to see demo crews arriving to work on a plan for demolition there. It won't be consistent work. So I just wanted to give everyone a heads up. And then finally, we have 4 sets of, and I have this on my paving list because it's road related, but it's not really paving or construction. I have 4 sets of dynamic solar speed signs that we ordered over the winter, and you'll see those being installed very soon. And the idea is that we'll be rotating locations throughout town in areas where we often receive complaints about speeding. So the first 4 locations you'll see these signs appear will be East Street, Monument Valley Road, probably 2 of our 2 areas where we receive the most complaints. We're also going to be installing them on that stretch of Route 71, probably shortly after paving, just to remind people that it does drop down to a 35-mile-an-hour zone there. And then Upper North Plain Road, another area where we receive a lot of complaints. So those will be our first 4 locations. And after that, the police department and the highway department will be working together to choose other locations. So they're not quite the same as the ones on Taconic Avenue. Those are on permanent beacons up there. These are more mounted to signposts, like those green posts that you see all over town. So they're easy for us to move, and you'll start to see those popping up shortly. And that's all I have.
Thank you.
One question.
Yes.
As well.
For the roundabout, Mark, would you mind reminding us of the timeline of the roundabout? I know that you mentioned we're starting it, but just the overall,
We don't have a schedule from DOT quite yet when they're starting. We just know that they're starting or resuming construction this spring. All the underground work was done last year. So you'll see the above ground work beginning this spring. And as soon as I have some firm dates, I'll share that.
Okay, thank you.
Garfield?
Yes. Mark, how effective are these signs, and are they costly? And yeah, I guess I want to know how effective they are, I guess. And are they costly?
They're not these new signs are not as costly as the ones we installed several years ago on Taconic Avenue. These are a cheaper version. They're similar to the ones you see when you're entering Stockbridge from both directions.
Mm-hmm.
Much smaller, LED strobes to just warn people. So I think they're effective. They remind people that, they're in 25-mile-an-hour zones, 35-mile-an-hour zones, any area where we constantly have problems. It's just a way, we have the speed trailers. They're just a little clunkier to move around town. These will be permanently installed. And they'll be not permanently installed, but I mean, they'll be installed on a sign post and they can remain there for as long as they need to. But I think they're quite effective. It's just, again, a little reminder to drivers that they need to slow down.
Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Oh, if I can just add one more
Of course.
point to that. We can also collect data from them. So we'll see if speeds are dropping. And
Oh,
we,
good.
we post that information on the police department's website. In fact, that information for the speed trailers is already available on the police department website if anyone's interested in seeing the results of our trailers now.
I was just going to ask that. Is there a way to see that people are aware that, uh-oh, I better be careful.
Okay, moving ahead, just before I forget, there are 6 panelists and 18 attendees at this point for a total of 24 people. Licenses and permits, seasonal club, all alcoholic liquor license renewal for Wyandotte Country Club. Do I have a motion?
I make a motion to approve the all alcoholic liquor license renewal for the Wyandotte Country Club.
Second.
Any discussion or questions? Seeing none, roll call vote. Garfield.
Hi.
Eric. Eric,
Aye.
I'm sorry. Lee?
Aye.
Ed, I'm sorry.
Aye.
Lee said aye and aye, so it's unanimous. Previous business, Housatonic School RFP, update on marketing and site visits, and a vote extended deadline for proposals from April 27th to June 10th. Mark?
Hey, thanks again, Steve. Just a real quick marketing update to share this evening. A little data to provide. And then at the end of this, I'd like to ask the board to consider the extension request that was in your packet in an executive summary for tonight's meeting. So we've received 22 requests for copies of the RFP as of this afternoon. Our marketing video, which I'm sure you've all seen, has been viewed 350 times. The project was listed on LoopNet, which is a commercial real estate platform. We marketed the project in our nearest metro areas, so Boston and New York City. And those ads reached about 19,520 people as of late last week. So I think we're getting a pretty good reach. And that was through both Facebook and Instagram. We installed 2 development opportunity signs up at the property late last week. So that's directing folks that are interested to our website. And then our local media outlets have covered this. And I just wanted to thank them. I know some are on this call tonight for their part in this effort. So that's all I have other than a request for the board to consider an extension until June 10th.
Mark, can you just give a very brief explanation of why you want the extension?
Yeah.
I realize it's in the packet.
Yeah. Basically, we just want to give potential developers more time to solidify their plans, maybe reach out to potential tenants, secure financing in their own budgets, and complete their designs. You know, we want to give developers the best shot they can to put their best foot forward on this. So.
Terrific. Do I have a motion?
I make a motion to grant the extension of the Housatonic School RFP from April 17th to June 10th.
Second.
Discussion. Seeing none, roll call vote. Garfield?
Yes.
Eric?
Aye.
Ed?
Yes.
Lee?
Aye.
And aye, it's unanimous. Mark, Peter's in a waiting room, Peter Dillon, so I don't know what waiting room it is. There's a Zoom room at the bottom.
He's in the Zoom room. He just sent a text, so I'll go ahead and
Okay.
promote him once.
Okay.
we're
Next
there.
is appointment to the Conservation Commission. Do I have a motion?
I make a motion to grant the appointment to the Conservation Commission of Thomas
Ferris.
Ferris. Thomas Ferris.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none. Garfield?
Yes.
Eric?
Aye.
Ed?
Yes.
Lee?
Aye.
And aye, it's unanimous. Moving next is Berkshire Hills Regional School District, boring authorization for a feasibility and schematic design study for Monument Mountain Regional High School. That's just, there's Peter.
Hi, sorry about that.
No problem.
I'm called Zoom Room. I don't know why. I'll try to fix it. So thanks all for letting me join you tonight. What I wanted to do was give a quick update on where we are with the high school project. And if it's okay, I'll share 2 slides and sort of talk through them quickly. And then I'm happy to respond to any questions. So let me try to do that. You know, I may not. Mark, are you able to enable me to share screens?
It should be good, but I'll double check right now.
And if not, I'll just talk through it.
Oh, sorry, it was turned off. All panelists are good to go now.
Okay. So give me just a sec. Are you able to see that?
Yes, we are.
Okay, so the big news is the MSBA just invited us into the eligibility period, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But since we last had a proposal since the voters, we've done a number of things that I think are really quite significant. So I thought I'd share a little context for that and then talk about the next steps. The big thing we did, and some of you were directly involved in this, is we redid the original agreement, particularly the capital assessment formula. So we cleaned up a lot of language, but the big shift was the assessments for capital projects used to be tied to the percentage of students in each town as part of the total number of kids in the 3 towns. So historically, Great Barrington's cared about 74% of the kids. Maybe it started when I came here on 72, and it's gone up to 74%. So if we, in the old formula, did a capital project, Great Barrington would cover 74% of the project. Maybe 5 years ago now, we redid it, and the voters in Stockbridge did something which was quite remarkable, and they voted against their own economic self-interest. And the new capital assessment would assess Great Barrington 54.03% of any future project. So that in and of itself is a huge deal, and in some ways maybe the most significant thing that's happened during my time in the district. The other things we've done since the last proposal is we've really refined our educational plan, including a dramatic expansion of vocational programs. So in Massachusetts, approved vocational programs are called Chapter 74 programs. And what's really important about that is there are funding mechanisms tied to it, but it also lets high school age students work in a hands-on way within the law. And if you weren't part of a Chapter 74 program, high school students would largely have to observe. So right now we've got 2 approved programs, one in horticulture and one in automotive, and we hope to add 4 programs over time. And we've done a big study with the Regional Employment Board looking at the needs of the community. One would be sort of in the medical arts, preparing people as a stepping stone to becoming nurses, but a range of medical technician roles, and that's a real need. One would likely be in hospitality. One would likely be connected to small manufacturing, and potentially our horticulture program might expand to a bigger agriculture program. And then the other likely one would be home building with connections to several of the trades, including plumbing and electricians. So that's a big deal. Our elementary and middle school, which we affectionately refer to as new schools, aren't so new anymore. They're teenage schools now, and we're about to retire the debt on each of them. So from a tax perspective, that'll make some room for both our 3 communities and the taxpayers to start supporting a potential new high school. There are also shifts in the number of voters in each of the three communities, and the demographics of those voters, and then we hope to do a bunch more around outreach and communication. The next slide is, and again, the MSBA invited us into this eligibility period. We've been applying every year since we had a failed vote, which is almost 10 years now. And this year they approved 17 projects and they rejected 42. So it's a huge deal that we got this far. It's quite remarkable. We're one of two unrenovated high schools in Berkshire County, the other one being Pittsfield High School, and every other high school in Berkshire County is either a new building like Wacona and Taconic, or part of Mount Greylock, or a significantly renovated building. A few weeks ago, the school committee voted unanimously to support $1.5 million for a feasibility study. Because the state, or the Massachusetts School Building Authority, paid for the first feasibility study, or a large portion of it, they won't pay for a second one. So this one's on us. But as we get through this, it opens up the possibility that they will pay for what could likely be half of a future high school project. Right now, and this is the second one of these I've done, I'm doing Stockbridge next week, but I'm talking to select boards and finance committees to get their recommendations to put the authorization for borrowing on the warrant. It won't have a tax impact in this coming year's budget. The borrowing will likely happen next spring. And then the first impact of it is a short-term borrowing will just be interest. And then assuming we have a great plan and build support for a bigger project, the borrowing will be built into that. The next couple things that'll happen is the school committee will appoint a building committee and likely engage dozens of volunteers in addition to the building committee to engage people in the community. And then hopefully this time we set up, after the study happens, after all this work happens, a successful vote. The other thing that I'll mention that you've probably been reading about, if you've been paying attention, is this whole regional school district planning board. So that's a parallel process, and each of the 8 towns, the 3 Berkshire Hills towns and the 5 Southern Berkshire towns, have 3 members, a select person, a school committee member, and a member at large, that have been meeting for over 2 years to explore the possibility of consolidation or collaboration. Last week on Tuesday, Jake Eberwein and his group of consultants made a recommendation that the 2 districts do consolidate pre-K to 12 and have a shared high school. Right now we have about 530 or so students in our high school, grades 9 to 12. And Southern Berkshire has a high school that's grades 7 to 12, but they're 9 to 12 students. It's around 160, maybe 180. As we go to the MSBA to start this design work, we're going to look at what happens if we build a high school for 530, 550 students, and also what happens if we build a high school for 700 or so students. And we're leaving that possibility open. Either way, I see us building a new high school. What is potentially in flux is whether we're building a high school for 3 towns or we're building a high school for 8 towns. So I'll stop there. You probably have a lot of questions, but my big ask is your recommendation along with the warrant article. So at the 3 town meetings this year, I can request that the voters support borrowing for a feasibility study in the amount of $1.5 million.
So just to be clear to the select board, what the motion tonight can be one or two motions. One motion would be to recommend the articles and to put them on the town meeting warrant. We could split that up if someone desires, but the cleanest and easiest would just be to recommend and put on the town meeting warrant. So do we have questions of Dr. Dillon?
I got a question, Peter. Just curious. I saw on your slide it said that 17 were approved for this and 42 were rejected. How many openings are there for funding for the 50% or whatever for the building of a new school? Do we know that, or?
Yeah, so and they use very careful language in this, and Mark might have forwarded what they shared with us around this, and if he hasn't, I can send it so you can all see it. The thinking from the MSBA perspective is you get into this first round, which is the eligibility period. You do the feasibility study, so you pick one preferred option, and usually they look at 3 possibilities: a brand new building, renovation, and an addition, which is sort of in the middle, or simply a renovation. And what we tried to do the last time was a renovation and addition. It's a little early for me to say this, but both Wacona and Taconic used the model school program and built new buildings. And the advantage to building new buildings is you could do it in a faster timeline. There aren't transitions around moving people, particularly students, in the space as construction happens. And then when the building is complete, you tear down the previous building. But the feasibility study process will determine that. My understanding is the MSBA allocates different schools in different phases of this, with the expectation that in a year or two, when the feasibility study's done, there'll be sufficient funding there to support those 17 schools. Maybe one of them drops out along the way, and maybe another one comes in. The MSBA gets their money off a dedicated tax. So there's a big pot of money there. There's also some more federal money coming in for construction, but they're comfortable that in not 23, but 24, 25, they'll be able to fund these 17 projects. And from their perspective, starting on August 1st, we have 270 days to do all the things they need us to do. And then at that point, we try to move into the next phase when we have a preferred option that we share with the voters and hopefully get their support on that. The reason why this is really high stakes, and I'm both excited, but I'm a little nervous, that we got back in the queue after 2 unsuccessful votes is a minor miracle. And I think this is the only shot we're going to have with the MSBA in the foreseeable future. So I think our educational plan is more sophisticated. We did all this legwork that got us back here. But I think that the next 2 years, we're going to spend a tremendous amount of time making a compelling case to the voters that some sort of building is appropriate, that this is what happens, and that the MSBA might cover anywhere from maybe on the low end 46 to the high end 54% of the project. And it would have been very hard, or it would be very hard, to try to do this kind of work without their support.
Okay, so the funding will be there if we have the plan together. The obstacle at the end of the day is to get the votes from the towns to move it forward.
Right. And I think with the shift in the cost to Great Barrington, which is significant, it'll be interesting. In the previous votes, I worried a lot about Great Barrington and less about Stockbridge and West Stockbridge. In a future vote, I think I'll worry equally about Great Barrington and Stockbridge. Great Barrington because there wasn't broad-based support the first couple times, and Stockbridge because they have relatively few students, and we're asking them to pick up a slightly bigger share of the cost.
Lee.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. This is very helpful. I apologize if you've mentioned this already, but just roughly a possible timeline where a vote might come before the Great Barrington voters.
It's interesting, and it's tied a little bit to how long it takes to do the feasibility study and what the preferred option is, and it could be tied up a little bit with the regional school district planning board, but hopefully that decision will be made. I think there's the possibility of so we're the spring of 22. There's a possibility of the spring of 23. So almost a year from now, maybe the fall of 23. It's a little early to say that, but that's what I'm thinking. Steve, do you have any different thoughts on that in terms of?
No, I think that's the earliest it's going to be. They have a very prescribed timeline, and I think that will be the earliest.
Okay. One other question.
Yeah.
Depending on what happens, if there is a consolidation, regionalization that we bring in Southern Berkshire, would we be on the hook with what happens to that school because they did put a significant amount of money into that, or is that tied into anything that we would have to?
Yeah, I mean, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself on this. I imagine if we pull off this merger between two districts, it'll be a really big deal, and we'll seek some sort of legislative action on that. And the current proposal, as stated, is we'd form one large district, but the high school would be consolidated. Based on all those conversations, and this is very much a moving target, I would think that at least in the short term, the elementary schools would continue to function as they are. So we'd have to write a new regional agreement for both districts. And one of the things that would be advantageous to all 8 towns would be to figure out what each district's assets and liabilities are, and who's responsible for which part of each, and then maybe to get some legislative relief on some of that. So I think Southern Berkshire has about $5 million of debt in the pellet heating system and the roof at Mount Everett, and in all likelihood, our 3 towns wouldn't want to inherit that debt. We're about to retire our debt on our elementary and middle school, but we still have some obligations. They probably don't want anything to do with that debt, and the writing of a thoughtful new regional agreement would address all of that.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Anyone else?
I just wanted to say that I appreciate what you're doing now. It was something that was important to me and in my campaign. I'm glad to hear that the talks with consolidation are actually moving forward, and that you are planning to have a few more vocational programs or programs at the high school, namely the last with the carpentry and the electric and plumbing mixed in is a great idea. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Garfield, for raising that. I'm really excited about it, and we have a lot of work to do. And while I really hope the thing with the 5 towns south of us happens, if for some reason it falls apart and it doesn't happen, then at least we've answered the question of why aren't you merging with Southern Berkshire, right? And hopefully we answer it and we do it. But if for some reason it falls apart, then I feel good about all the work we did. The other thing is the Regional School District Planning Board has a really good website. And you could just Google Regional School District Planning Board or 8towns.org. And there are probably thousands of pages of reports on everything from vocational education to transportation and how long kids might be on buses, to the comparative contractual obligations and salaries of both districts. It's in such granular detail. I've never seen anything as thoughtful. And Steve and maybe Ed remember in 2009, and maybe Lee too, when I came, I inherited another consolidation report that was all of 40 pages. And in part, it fell apart because it didn't even look at transportation and the depth and quality of this work and that Jake Eberwein has done, and Lucy Preschker is the chair and Peter Taylor is the co-chair, and all the other people that are involved, including Steve, is really quite remarkable. So I think we've got a good foundation there.
Garfield, you bring up a really good point. There are 3 exciting projects that the school district are doing: the consolidation, the new school, renovated school, but we can't lose sight of the career vocational technical education that we're moving ahead with, because that is so important to South County. So we're working hard on all 3 of those, and those are all very exciting projects.
And just Steve, I'll add one sort of point of detail on it. That in the report is a really thoughtful map around how many vocational seats there are in Berkshire County. And because of McCann up in the north, there's something like 642 seats. Because of Taconic and Pittsfield, there are 400 and change. And in South County, all told, there are about 40 seats. So there's a huge inequity there that our young people want to do vocational things, and some of them are doing it, but 10 times less than our closest neighbor. So keeping the 2 programs and adding 4 more should really address a need. And it's not just what kids want to study, but when was the last time you called an electrician? When was the last time you called a plumber? Those folks are getting older and retiring, and channeling people into a pipeline for the workforce, and they make really good salaries, right, or really good income. It addresses some of the stuff around housing and people staying in Berkshire County. I think we're finally getting a plan that is addressing multiple needs on multiple levels. Other questions?
Yeah, I want to again, thank the work that's gone into this, and it's just really, really detailed and exciting. And I echo what Garfield said about the vocational aspect to that. I think it's very important. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
Peter, you might just mention what's in the budget for the addition in vocational in this year's budget that will hopefully be approved at town meeting.
So one other thing that we added, and I didn't go into the budget in fine detail. All our schools run pretty lean in terms of staff, including the district. And at the high school, we have a principal and we have an assistant principal, and largely everybody else is a teacher except for some guidance counselors, a couple social workers. We've added an assistant principal for career vocational and technical education because we need the support to build out those programs. For the past several years, a couple people have shared that as stipended positions on top of their regular teaching or counseling load. And they've done some really good work, but we think to take this to the next level, it really makes sense to invest in a full-time person to work on this from soup to nuts. So there's a publicizing piece, there's a recruiting new students piece. There's meeting the standards with the state. There are a whole host of things. Hang on just a sec. My dog really wants to get out of this room.
All right.
If you're taking a straw poll, one motion is fine with me.
Yeah, sorry.
I have it, yeah.
Okay, let's make one motion.
Okay.
And
I make a motion to recommend and put on the town meeting warrant a borrowing authorization for a feasibility and schematic design study for the Monument Mountain Regional High School.
Second.
any other questions or discussion? Seeing none, roll call vote. Garfield,
Yes.
Eric,
Aye.
Ed,
Yes.
Lee,
Yes.
and yes. So it's unanimous. Peter, thank you very much.
Yeah, no, thank you all very much. And I'm happy at your convenience to come back and share updates. And I'll be running around and convincing other folks this is a good idea.
Good luck. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
Please do.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Mark, do we have people here for the training?
So I don't see Gwendolyn on the line, so I guess we should just ask if there's anyone on the line representing Multicultural Bridge. Just go ahead and raise your hand. So
Just raise your hand and we'll recognize you. Okay, I'm not seeing anyone.
I'm going through the list here and I'm not seeing any.
I saw Erica on there earlier.
Well, I don't know that she's representing, she's there, but I don't think she's
Oh, okay.
representing Bridge on it. Okay, we'll reschedule that then. Our agendas are pretty full for the next month or so, or maybe a little longer, but we'll find a time to reschedule it. So we'll move ahead to citizen speak time. And Ashley, I had promised Claudia she could speak first if I missed her at the last meeting, but she's off the line. So we will start with, from Stephanie Wright to everyone, Bridge is here. Hold on. Michelle, I'll let you talk just because you hand your hand up and then we'll go back to the training.
No, Steve, if you want to go ahead and move on to Bridge, that's not a problem.
Okay, thank you, Michelle.
Okay, no problem. I'll lower my hand.
Thank you. Okay, Mark, do you see the people who, I see Stephanie.
Yeah, let's go ahead and open. We'll promote Stephanie. Still not seeing Gwendolyn though, unless there's someone else here also.
There's Stephanie. Stephanie, just unmute yourself and turn on your video.
Hi, Gwendolyn will be coming on. She's coming on.
Okay.
Good afternoon. Good evening, everyone.
Hello.
Stephanie, while we're waiting, is there anyone else on the line from Bridge that we should go ahead and promote?
Destania might come on. Another lady, Destania. I gave her the link.
I don't see her right now, but I'll keep looking for her, and Mark will keep looking for her.
On the agenda, I thought we were like line number 7 or something. I don't know. It just seems like we're further down in the.
We're fast tonight.
Yes, you were. Let me see. I will send her a.
Please do.
Only because we were down so low on the. Okay. I'm going to just let her know that we're in. Is she getting on yet? I just sent her and said that we're on now and we're in the room.
Yeah, I don't see her yet, but we'll keep looking for her.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so oh, you guys are out of sequence.
No, we're in perfectly good sequence.
Oh. I thought for sure there'd be some kind of conversation, but I guess there wasn't much. Okay.
Have you heard back from Gwen?
Not yet.
Because I'm not going to make all these fine people wait too long.
All right. I just saw that we were down on the agenda when I went on, and I said to Gwendolyn, we're number 6 or something on the agenda.
We made it a light agenda because we knew this was on there and we wanted to put our attention towards it. There's Gwen.
Oh, there she is.
Gwen, just unmute yourself, turn on your video, and we're ready to go.
Hello.
Hello.
You think this is my first rodeo. Sorry about that. How are you doing?
Good.
Good. All right. So you're ready for us for a training? You're ready? All right. The way I've done this when we did other town trainings, that we have our presentation in a Menti so that people can follow along. And hopefully I'm able to share my screen, right?
We'll make sure you are, yes. Just go ahead. I think you are now.
Okay, great. I'm pulling it up right this moment. Great. Thank you for your patience. Okay. Didn't expect you to go through the agenda that fast.
We're very efficient.
Yeah. Here we go. Can you all see this?
Yes.
All right. So it'd be really wonderful if you and if the folks following along want to do so as well. You go on your phone is better to menti.com and enter this code, but you could toggle between screens. But this is where Stephanie and I will be presenting this evening. So hello, everybody. Here, I'll give you another minute. I'm Gwendolyn Van Sant from Bridge, and I'm here with my colleague, Stephanie Wright. And we had the privilege of partnering with the town of Great Barrington on the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Grant, which there are several, or a few hundred of these across the Commonwealth, and we were partnered on the Great Barrington Project. And we'll talk to you all about it, but CARE-GB stands for Climate Action, Resilience, and Equity. So this is, if you go to menti.com and you type in this code 5677-8583, you'll be able to follow along with the training. And because we're on a town recorded meeting, it's not the usual way that we present trainings. We like using Menti because when people interact, which is a part of our training, it's all done anonymously. So feel free for anyone that's participating to participate alongside the select board. So again, I'm Gwendolyn. Bridge was born in Great Barrington. We're turning 15 years old, and our co-founders are Marta Bordone and Bob Norris. And our purpose was really to be catalysts for change and integration, integrating the diversity that had really, the immigrant population had doubled in 2007 in our area. And working as a medical and mental health interpreter in Spanish, I was inspired along with Marta to create an organization that continued to advocate and support individuals, but also would also loop back and train institutions and organizations how better to respond to diversity. So we've been at that for about 15 years. We are certified by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts for a supplier diversity program. That means we're 51% women run and 51% minority run. Minority is a term designated by the state for folks that are underrepresented or historically underrepresented. Our core competencies are multicultural awareness, cultural competence and diversity training, education, language classes, interpretation, and translation. So those are the things that we do in a community. We have a long history of partnering with the town of Great Barrington. It started back in the Welcoming Massachusetts work over a decade ago. Most recently, we support the Du Bois Legacy campaign. We've supported Latino festivals and citizens academies with the police department. We've worked on trust policy work together. So we feel very much a part of working with the town of Great Barrington and the select board, and appreciate the partnership. I'll turn it over to Stephanie from here.
Well, good evening. My name is Stephanie Wright, and I've been with Bridge since 2009. And we always start our trainings with the 5 agreements. These are the things that we're going to be asking you to do tonight: to be impeccable with your word, not to take things personally, don't make assumptions, let people say what they have to say. We're going to say always do your best, because on the Menti, you'll be asked questions, and we're asking you to answer them to the best of your ability, and be skeptical and learn to listen when we think we're listening. So a lot of times we're speaking in our heads. So we're just asking us to listen carefully. Active listening tonight. We also ask that we respect confidentiality, and we're saying that some people speak more than others, and we're going to share time equitably so that everyone can participate. We're going to listen carefully and not interrupt, let people get their thoughts out. Keep an open mind and be open to learning, because some of these things you may not have come across your mind. And be respectful of the speaker, even when you do not respect the views that are being said. We're not going to assassinate each other's tonight, the way we're speaking. Now we have Elmo up here, and we speak of Elmo because it stands for enough, let's move on, so that we don't get bogged down into an area or a thought. Anyone can call it. We can say, let's move along, and we can take this up another time. And the other thing, we have WAIT, and that stands for why am I talking? Because again, some people get lost in their thoughts, and we're asking that you might say that to yourself if you feel like you're bogged down and you just keep speaking. Now, can we get a thumbs up so we all agree to that? Thank you. So here we are with the heritage, and Gwendolyn will tell you how we're going to do this on Menti.
Yeah, so again, I put the link in the chat. It's also up here if you go to menti.com. When you go there, you click a heart and send some love to all of our Great Barrington participants. So if you can go in there, we like to do this to kind of begin any conversations around diversity. A lot of times folks think that diversity is about the other, and really it's about each one of us. And so if we think back to our grandparents' heritage, you will come up with more diversity than what you think is in front of you. So for folks, this is a select board training, so we're asking definitely all the select board members to put it in there, but anyone else in the community that wants to participate alongside us, please do. But we're looking for your grandparents' heritage in the Menti.
I'm sorry, Gwyneth. So
Menti.
I might be running behind. I gotta log on to Menti. I'm not gonna just tell you these answers.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
If you'd like to tell me, that's great. We'd like to have some dialogue. This is one of the lower hanging fruit questions. Some of the other ones might feel like people want anonymity. But if you want to own your grandparents' heritage out loud for folks to know, that's great too.
I don't have a problem with that.
So what's your grandparents' heritage?
I give it to my knowledge. My grandfather, my mom's side was West Indian.
Mm-hmm.
My grandmother, I don't know actually her origin. My grandmother on my father's side, I do believe had at least a quarter Blackfoot Indian in her, and the rest I don't know either. But that's, to my knowledge, that's what I know of my grandparents.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And again, anyone there's about 20 other folks here. If anybody wants to participate alongside us, that's great. But it's great to see again the connections among the folks that answered, and then also the diversity that's there. And thank you for the person that said the diversity is about each one of us, or echoed that. Cultural competence, it's actually a term that's becoming a little outdated. I'm going to just say this is our certification in cultural competence, which means supporting folks working cross-culturally as best they can, right? So Stephanie will walk you through breaking down culture, and competence obviously is how well you do that. And I just want you all to know in the trends right now, people are talking a lot more about cultural humility, which is what we start with and we just started with, which is understanding your own identity first, and then figuring out how to work with the other person across the table. So knowing your cultural heritage, knowing your biases, knowing your privileges, all those things are really important, and being able to interact and be welcoming to others. And so that cultural humility practice sometimes is eclipsing the cultural competence work, because people tend to think you can check a box and be competent at some point, and we believe that the work is ongoing. So this is one thing I wanted you to know about this. So cultural proficiency, competence, humility, all those things are wrapped up into the work that we're going to talk through tonight.
And so we have these intersecting beliefs, attitudes, and values. And it goes with perceptions, your relationships, your political and moral emphasis. And we definitely want you to understand the policy, government, and city-town planning. We know here in Great Barrington that people have access to the select board. You can come up to the town hall. Maybe it might not be as easy in an urban setting. You may not get to know the mayor and the different ones that are in the select people. And we have language and body language, appearance, humor, all these different things. This is how we identify our culture.
So I think we know this, again, because of where we are tonight, but this is one of our major drivers of culture, is what happens with our select board and through our town hall and town government. And some folks, that's more invisible than others. But for us, I think it is very obvious. But one of the things we found when we did the CARE project with the town last year is that not everybody felt like they had access to the select board. Not everybody feels like they have access to being on a committee, serving on a committee, attending committee meetings, speaking up for themselves. Not everybody knows how to get the agenda. Not everybody knows how to get something they care about onto the agenda. So part of the work that we do in cultural competence work and equity work is figuring out how to break down those barriers and create pathways of access. And so I think that that's one thing for the select board to think about, and for folks that do attend these types of meetings regularly and feel welcome, look around of who are the usual suspects that always show up, and where's the rest of our community, right? So our next question is, where do we establish culture? So all those things that Stephanie walked us through, you saw on the slide, where does that get established? The system of attitudes and beliefs and values. Where do we get those messages from?
Our parents, usually from school.
Yep.
They're just existing on the street corner sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So neighborhoods, like you said, your home base. Thank you. Family, school, teachers, church, media.
That's right.
Media is a big driver, right? Yeah. Any other ideas than what Garfield has shared and the answers here? Yeah. Media is a big driver, right? That's one that, and social media also. One that we often miss, and it's okay because we're not at work, but generally we do this training at work and people forget to say their workplace environments.
I see we have friends here, and it's where people are agreeing on how they're going to be interacting and acting in an environment. So it could be pubs, it could be gym, when you're at a gym, any club that you're at, you're agreeing that we're going to be acting a certain way. And you can tell immediately when someone walks into that culture, you can tell right away that either they belong or they don't belong, depending upon how they're going to be interacting and reacting in the environment.
And so as we talk through the climate work and what came out of the community partnership, this came up quite a bit, right? We have open spaces, we have public spaces, we have farmers market, but who actually feels welcome there, just like I talked about the select board meeting. So as you're thinking through what cultural competence is and means, sitting on the select board and being ambassadors for the town or being your residents of the town, look around and who do you see and who don't you see? And what, like Stephanie said, if someone different walks in, how does that change? How does the dynamic change? And it's not, if you're one of the folks that's born and raised here, or like you're usually going to that spot because it's your regular spot, you won't notice that unless you actually make an effort to pay attention. But I think that's a really important piece. So we're not believing that people intentionally exclude, but there's a way in which if the same people are always in a space, other people get the message that they don't belong.
And so we have the diversity slide here, and I usually use this with the iceberg, and we know that on the bottom of the iceberg is the major part of it, but that top part is just what we're seeing on the top. And we have secondary and primary diversities. And we can see age, ethnicity, gender, and all those different things as we're observing people. We can usually get some kind of idea. But can anyone tell me on the secondary side what you would be doing to know that? Of the same person that you saw, their age or ethnicity, what would you be doing on that second, on the right-hand side, that column? How would you get to know this?
Conversation.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You're getting to know the person. You're getting a relationship. You're starting to talk. You're starting to, get a conversation with one another. And sometimes on the left-hand side, we know that some of these identities are definitely, what do I want to say? They're protected. So you have to be very careful about how you're saying what the person is, their age, their gender, because if you could sometimes make mistakes, and how you would not make the mistake is you would be doing the secondaries, that right-hand side. You would be speaking and talking and interacting, and then you would get to know the truth of the person.
May I say something?
Yes.
Would we not, in general, a lot of times, we generalize, or we look at someone who's dressed well and say, yeah, this cat's got money, or they're driving a nice ride, well, you know darn well they're not from the hood, if you will, and they're not they probably have a nice house is what you're thinking. All these things you're going to guess without having the knowledge of really what's going on. So we do tend to put people in certain categories without actually speaking with them.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really important point. Another little bit that I want to talk about, the left side, the kind of primary diversity. These are really important things to think about. Age and generational differences is the whole training that we do, intergenerational difference. It's the first time in our country that we have 5 generations in the workplace. 4 years ago, I was saying 4 generations, and then we just added another one. So it's the first time that everybody's still working and figuring out how to work when being at work means something totally different, right? And how you interact at work. And if we move down a little bit, gender is a social construct. And I want to highlight that because gender identity and gender expression became a protected class in 2016. And along with that comes compliance issues. So folks that don't identify on the binary, meaning don't identify as men or women, have rights, and they've always had them, but now they're amplified and supported if they don't have a place to go to the bathroom, if they're not reflected on the forms when they fill out for employment. So a lot of times people use pronouns on name tags and pronouns in emails to reflect affirming identity and affirming belonging for people that identify on a more fluid gender continuum. So again, the binary is male or female, and I can't tell you how surprised I am how many forms there are only those two boxes still to check. Because really folks can identify on a continuum and it can change at any time. And anybody in a workplace environment or community are accountable to creating spaces where they can feel fully welcome and integrated. So gender is just a social construct. It's attached to the sex of an individual, but it's the ideas and assumptions we attach to it. And that changes across cultures, across time. It's changed over time what gets attached to gender, masculinity, femininity. Gender identity, the most basic way to talk about it is male, female, transgender male, transgender female, but there are many more categories to get into, and it's something that you should be aware of if you're working in community. So physical and mental ability are pretty obvious. Race is another one that I want to define as a social construct. Again, that's misconstrued as being attached to biology, but really it's just a social construct. And race also can change across lines and has historically, you've heard probably about the counting the drops of blood that make you one race or another across different state lines. But really, race is a social construct to preserve access to wealth, access to power, and other entitlements if you can identify as white. And that who has been able to identify as white over the history has changed. There are huge books and lots of research of how the Irish became white, how the Polish became white, how the Jews became white. Those are actual titles of really thick books that are here on my bookshelf. So you can continue to research that and notice trends that are happening now as there is still attention about who is the majority in our country. Sexual orientation is simply who you're attracted to romantically and physically. And those things are really important to separate out gender, gender identity, sexual orientation, and sex. Sex is your biology, and the others I talked about. So those are just some basic ones that we're racing through this. We usually spend a couple hours on these first few slides, but just because you're here, we just wanted to give you some tidbits into what we consider the foundations of cultural work. So that's what I have for you right now on that.
And then we talk about poverty and privilege, and we define poverty, the extent to which an individual does without adequate resources. And we know for sure that definitely happens in Berkshire County. We have people that are doing without adequate resources. And the privilege side, we have the earned or unearned benefits that affords an individual or a group a level of power and access. And when I think of access in Berkshire County, I'm looking at the hill towns where you don't have transportation, or if there's a snowstorm, it's depends upon which side you are on, and if you can get to these things, and if you can be, you're existing without these adequate resources. And I'm also thinking of food deserts too. When you're out in those outer reaches, you got to get down to Big Y or Price Chopper. So this is what Ruby Payne, this is her definition.
Yeah, for poverty. Yeah, she's written a book, Understanding the Frameworks of Poverty, and has an initiative that's national, Bridges Out of Poverty, where she goes to cities gateway cities and tries to reverse generational poverty. There's an initiative in Pittsfield called Working Cities that's based on that.
Can we
So
just
in
go
the-
back for a moment?
Say it again?
Can we go back to privilege for
Yes.
a moment?
Yep.
I guess I want to say it, but I feel very like maybe I shouldn't, but I don't think privilege is for everyone, or everyone doesn't have privilege. And I think there is white privilege. And I'm surprised you have not touched on it or spoke about it or explained it or.
So Garfield, you've been through this training before, and I know you know that we get into it, right? Garfield was in about maybe 20 hours, 24 hours of training that we're trying to condense into 90 minutes. What we like about Ruby Payne's work is that she talks about poverty, and we've overlaid privilege without having the social identifiers of race or class, because privilege cuts across those things, right? So there is race privilege, and there is gender privilege, and there is class privilege. There's also privilege in different ways in different communities. So Stephanie was talking about just geographically where you're located, right? Whether you have broadband, like those are privileges, right? Those are places in which you have entitlements. And for us at the beginning of a foundational training, we like to talk about poverty and privilege in the broadest sense, because then when we teach more about class and gender and race, remember you took those 3 courses, systems of oppression, then we get into that much more deeply. But at this point, it's sort of this level setting of understanding these terms that get thrown around, because privilege is what we believe that most people have access to in some shape or form, not in all ways, and some of those are, outweigh others. But we do believe that most people experience privilege in some aspect of their life, even if they've not been told that and haven't experienced it. And then other ways, people experience poverty in larger and smaller scales. And so that's where we start. And then in a moment, I'll get to a little bit more about that. But I hear in this piece of our training, we're always trying to level set that we're all working with the same amount of language. So before we presented the care work, we wanted to make sure you had the baseline kind of where we start. And so here is a data, I don't know if you know Prosperity Now, but they track by city, by county, across the country, sort of good demographics to use and to kind of get a snapshot of the financial health of different communities. So for tonight, for the town of Great Barrington, we pulled the Great Barrington scorecard. So you can just take a moment to look at this, but it talks about the income poverty rate, the asset poverty rate, unbanked households, underbanked households, who has assets, unemployment rate, home ownership rates. So you kind of get a sense really of like this is what our county looks like. This is what privilege and poverty looks like in our county as it relates to finance, right? As it relates to generational poverty, wealth, and class status. So the place data is the Great Barrington data. State is Massachusetts, obviously. So this is an interesting piece, and I can send it along if you all haven't seen it before. We can send along the link. But if you Google Prosperity Now, you will find it, and you can put in any town. Some of our smaller towns, neighboring towns, don't make it, but many of them do. So here's the second card. It's a little gray, but this talks about income poverty rate according to race and ethnicity, right? So if you look at those same data points from the other slide, then you begin to see what Great Barrington looks like in this way. And there's one really important piece of this that I want to talk to you about is that like home ownership, it says 0. I know that there are African-American families that own homes in Great Barrington. It's the reason why, and what I cut off down here in the screenshot, is that there's a certain number of which then they don't count, right? So again, there's a couple of things to think about with that. It's like, what does that mean to not count as demographics in our area? This used to happen in the school district too, and I think DESE stopped doing it because it would say no Black kids in Monument, and we knew that there were families there, so we kind of advocated for them to actually put the number. But there's a certain number when you don't have to report. But if you take 2 steps back from what does that feel like for African-American families in our community to not even be counted, and not be seen. And then what does that do when we do deeper work around bias work? What does that do when people in different workplaces or in mortgage offices don't see people looking like that coming through, how do biases get built, even if it's unintentionally? So I just think it's good to look at the data, and then it's good to really analyze the data and then actually think about the impact of the data, right? What's missing, what's here, and how does that impact experiences of people being raised and educated in our community, that are working in our community in different sectors, and then those of you that are advocating on a municipal level, how does this data impact experience of people in our community? So again, Prosperity Now, you can look it up and dig around a little bit more. But just at that quick glance, did anything surprise you about the data that you could see?
Nope.
I'm doing this for you.
Was that a no for us?
No, there's nothing that stuck out.
Any other thoughts?
No.
All right. So this next piece is getting back into that poverty and privilege analysis. And again, Ruby Payne's model for poverty finance, which is what we were just talking about, right? Like how much you own, what you own, that's the financial piece. But there are all these other ways to have access and lack of access to resources. So there's the emotional, there's the physical, there's the mental ability, there's access to education, there's knowledge, there's just capacity to function. There's social networks, there's who has access to trust in a community, who's assumed to have integrity and who has to kind of prove it, who has support systems, where are their mentors and relationships, and then what are the hidden rules and how things operate, right, in a community. So when Ruby Payne, who's a social psychologist researching poverty her entire career, came up with that definition of the extent to which an individual does without adequate resources, she was thinking about all of these resources because money is just one aspect of it. So with Bridge, we talk about having a race analysis, a gender analysis, and a poverty analysis. And this is the kind of baseline foundational piece of the poverty analysis.
And so the Cannon Ranch Institute had this life enhancement program given at Fairview Hospital a few years ago. And they use the tires, and they're saying that unless all these tires are inflated to the right capacity, and you get less air and sense of purpose or spirituality, or you get less air and emotional, how will the car drive? How will you be able to drive the car with one of these tires not fully inflated? Can someone tell me if any one of these are tires?
Will the car pull one way or the other, right?
Yeah. Go ahead, Eric.
Just when you running low on one side, it always ruins your other tires and pulls you one way or the other.
Yeah, and it won't be a smooth ride. It could be pretty bumpy, and it could be dangerous if you pull into traffic. So they're saying unless we have our physical, our mental, our emotional, and our sense of purpose all fully inflated, and we're driving down the road with a fully inflated 4 tires, then we can get somewhere. Our health will be enhanced. But if one of these are out of whack, then our health will start to wane and suffer.
Thank you. All right. So we're getting closer to the climate piece of this, but when Stephanie talked about those 4 tires of health for an individual, we also have this model from the health model of thinking about the social determinants of health, which is just what things have to be in place for a community and a family and an individual to be healthy. So generally, they are researched as nutrition, transportation, education, your environment, the access to healthcare, access to stable work and access to secure housing and public safety. So if you have these things in order, you will have healthy communities, healthy families, right? With this model here, it's a little blurry, but the rural social determinants of health, I noticed that they added race and ethnicity. So I wanted you to think about, when I asked you to think about the prosperity card, and if you were surprised, but I also pointed out how certain groups aren't even counted. And then you look at the social determinants of health and how the understanding and being able to integrate on the race and ethnic level is important. You see that starts chipping away. So in Stephanie's model, it starts deflating one of the tires, right? And so individuals have a harder time because of these things that they don't have in place, not being counted, not having themselves reflected and represented, those types of things. So this last piece in the foundational part is our equity analysis. And again, it's climate action, resilience, and equity. That's what we decided collaboratively with Chris and the Sustainability Committee and Bridge and our constituents, that we would call this project CARE GB. And so this equity piece, I thought it was really important to share what an equity analysis looks like. So basically, any project or program that you sit to evaluate, that you look to approve as a committee, you would employ this analysis, right? So on the internal level, you would think about, do you have the knowledge? And I feel like this committee is really good at that, like asking a lot of questions and getting all the information that you need, right? Do you have the skills and capacity and the disposition to promote equity, right? So do you have the baseline? And then I would add to this, are you aware of your biases? And again, at Bridge, bias is not a bad word. Bias is simply our preferences. And the more you're aware of them and can own them, the better off you are, right? So if you try to pretend like they don't exist, that's when you get in the most trouble. Bias in and of itself is not bad. But being aware of it and knowing how it affects decision-making is the most important, right? So that's the internal piece. The interpersonal piece is, what relationships do you have, right? So who do you have relationships with individually, in partnerships with, if you're talking about the town, like who does the town partner with, and how do those promote diversity? How do those uplift diversity, right? Whether it's causes, whether it's individuals, whether it's representation, but that's a big analysis, right? So when you're thinking about programs and projects and asking the good questions that you all have to ask in your work, thinking about who benefits, right? And how can you navigate difference? How do you make sure that the right people are around the table? And then in a cultural level, this is just being aware of what's the dominant culture. If you had to describe in your mind right now the dominant culture in Great Barrington, whose behaviors and attitudes and values are prevalent, right? What takes center stage, what's assumed is appropriate or right. All of that is how cultural norms get established, and being able to unpack them is really important. In general, as Garfield was challenging me to keep the race conversation at the forefront, like being in a predominantly white area, being in New England, being in a predominantly white town, white culture would be predominant, right? And so what does that mean? Your ability to be able to interrogate what does that mean and how does that impact our constituents is the important work, right? And being able to think through your processes and have an analysis around equity and cultural norms is really important. One example, I hope that I don't offend anyone listening, but when the beginning of the water conversation, or maybe middle of the water conversation, having access to that in the town, there was an idea that people could go into some of our higher end restaurants to fill up their water bottles, right? And so the question is, who's going to do that, right? Like, who feels comfortable walking into some of our most expensive restaurants to go fill up their water bottle? It'd be a no-brainer for some of the people proposing the idea, but it would be a real barrier for other people that come from different cultural backgrounds that have never stepped foot in those restaurants, right? That have never felt welcome, couldn't afford a bill, an appetizer and a drink, that type of thing. So just being able to think through that when you're working on doing your good work. And then the institutional piece is policies and structures. How do they promote equity? And again, equity through your decision making and your resource allocation, right? Budget time, this is a really important question. How are we prioritizing communities? How are we extracting from communities? Through your budget allocations, right? Through what you support, through the decision making processes. This is a really important piece. So this is called a systemic analysis towards equity. And again, as Garfield said, you can layer on race equity, gender equity, class equity. But in general, this is the general framework to have an equity analysis. And it's what many organizations do as a general practice, right? Boards and staff and leadership and program leads all sharing an analysis so that when you sit down to evaluate a program, you're speaking the same language. So that's the end of our sort of foundations and cultural competence run through. And again, we have an 8-hour training that we just did in 40 minutes or whatever. So that's just sort of the basics of it without the interactive pieces, but giving you sort of shared language that we use in our work. Moving into what we were doing in the climate action work. One of the things we started with Maya, who's one of our former staff members that was the lead on this project, was that there were some false narratives that we had to kind of debunk right away. And one of those was that we wouldn't be seeing climate change for many generations. Obviously, or maybe it's not obvious to everyone, but I think even in the weather that we've seen in the last few months, we see that that's not true, right? And then the climate change will affect all of us equally. It will be indiscriminate and apolitical, and that's also not true, right? Again, the more access you have, the more you can respond and be resilient towards climate change, right? Some people don't have as many choices around basic things like heating and cooling and moving around, transportation, and it goes from there. This is an important question that we ask: who's vulnerable in Great Barrington and how are they vulnerable to climate change? So does anyone want to take a second to answer this question? This is an important question that we asked because this was a Commonwealth's Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Grant. And when we were asked to partner, what Bridges' bottom line is that we needed to be in partnership with the vulnerable communities. How would we be preparing vulnerable communities without having them at the center of the work? And so this was a really important first question for us. Who's vulnerable and how are they vulnerable to climate change? So what would you all say? And again, some of you have been in some of the trainings around this, but
seniors,
yes,
and those with physical disabilities.
Yes.
Excuse me, minorities sometimes.
Yeah. People that have been minoritized, like, yes. I love some people use the Mentee.
And I would say, for the elderly, the fixed income.
Yeah.
Those with addictions.
Yes. Yeah.
And children.
Yeah.
Just the whole affordability of like you were mentioning earlier, people living check to check and less means, right? That whether it's winter or summer, and affordability and just general shelter, right? Trying to upkeep the shelter they do have or not.
Yeah. Thank you.
And certainly people who don't have cars, if you can't get on that B bus and you're way outside of the B bus lines, you're not going to be able to, you're vulnerable.
Yeah. So here we're going to share really quickly when we asked our community members, and I should say that with Bridges, the partner, we were able to bring immigrants, African Americans, youth, and elderly. So we had a really good, diverse sampling of people from Great Barrington or neighboring towns participate in this project. And so these were some of the answers that those folks gave to that question that you just answered. So you touched on many of them, but communities that have limited access to resources and power and privilege. BIPOC folks, intersectional identity, seniors and victims of violence, undocumented immigrants, people with unstable housing, as you said, unstable food access, people who live in fear, harm from racial prejudice, addiction, as was said, single parents, because if one parent gets taken out, often there's not a backup, right? People who rarely see themselves, right, in the mainstream of power influence. So these were some of the answers from people. And then again, this is another list, but pretty similar. People with disabilities, visible and invisible. What we call invisible disabilities are concealable identities, like things that aren't obvious right up front, but they also are still considered disabilities. Youth, as you said, refugees, people that have been displaced, people with underinsured or lack of access to healthcare, and then people that limited or no access to internet. And mind you, this was in the start of the pandemic, so I think some of these things were already very much on people's minds and experiences people were living as we were talking to them. So this is another piece. So Maya was talking about this more than I, and alongside some of the sustainable committee members, but thinking about climate change on the local, national, and international level. So the point that was made about internationally was that there are lots of developed countries that are negotiating climate change, but there's also a really a huge impact on smaller countries, smaller states, island states that are having a larger impact with pollution and other impacts of climate change. And then on the national level, access to clean water is just one example. This was a Flint, Michigan image, but on the bottom picture, but just on the national level, just access to the basic needs. And then on the local level, the thing that we just wanted to talk about is how poverty is a multiplier for people that are going to experience the negative impact of climate change. So it's in reference to that previous thought that everybody's going to experience climate change. It's going to be bad for all of us. And that's somewhat true, but underdeveloped countries, folks in areas like Flint, and then also even our local area, people that are subject to poverty will be impacted more greatly than others. So that was our initial conversation, our initial greeting with the community members, bridging between town representatives, town committee members, and the community. And then we asked some of these questions just to get the conversation going. How do people stay cool in the summer? How do they get around town? Where do they get their food? And what's required to build trust and safety in community? And here are the insights that we wanted to share with you all. So there's 10 insights. The first one is that people living with vulnerabilities are most vulnerable to climate change. So it's a myth that that people are equally impacted, right? And that youth, there was a lot of conversation among the youth participating of the level of anxiety that they experience because of what's happening right now. And so there was some really sad and rich conversations with young people talking about their anxiety around climate change. Centering underrepresented voices. So this was an important piece. And that this was what our main goal was to make sure that the town was hearing directly from people that are marginalized, right? So that was our whole purpose in the work that we did last year, was making sure folks that are marginalized and vulnerable had training and information from members of the Sustainability Committee on climate change, but that also the voice and experience of those folks were present for the town. So that's what we're presenting. So it's really important in all of our equity work, all of our inclusion work, to always center those that are being advocated for, center the underrepresented voices. Most often these folks know best what they need, they just don't have access to it, right? That this climate conversation isn't just about carbon emissions. Sometimes the climate conversation feels inaccessible to folks that are living in vulnerable scenarios, or that folks that there's a lot of myth that certain groups don't care about climate change, and that's not true. So we did a lot to debunk that myth, and had some really great examples shared from the Sustainability Committee on youth voices, indigenous voices, different people that have been activated around climate change for some time. So that was
Yes, how you debunk that myth with
Which
certain groups of people?
How do we?
Climate change.
Well, I was just saying, Natalie was really great in bringing, Natalie Narotsky from the Sustainability Committee brought examples and authors to the conversation that reflected the group we were working with. So that was really helpful. Maya, who was on our team as well, did lots of research about what different communities had done so that folks could see themselves in the conversation, because that's not normally what's seen. Does that make sense? So how we debunked it was bringing in models and stories from other areas so people could see themselves as part of the conversation. Does that sound right?
Well, I'm trying to behave because if you read between my lines when I'm saying certain groups of people without trying to be prejudiced or being a bad person, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, so what I think to take away is still, with the right effort, which is a concerted effort, we were able to bring people together to have this conversation. Folks have other priorities, right? Especially in the pandemic, especially when they're living lives where they have less resources. This conversation is not the one that they have the time to sit down and have. Not that they don't care about it, not that they're not even activating within their homes and families or communities around it, but to kind of be involved in the way that we, again, perceive as being involved is the challenge. And then there are many people, right? Just like when we're in the voting rights conversation, there are many people that need to be educated about how they can be engaged and how they can make a difference, right? So that's part of the work that can be done in a community, is continually welcoming people into a conversation, not just for a duration of a grant, but continually making the effort to keep people involved, to keep relationships up, right? So those are some of the things I have to say. Because again, those dynamics that came up where people feel on the outside still exist. We didn't get rid of those in the year. So that those things are still issues and work that needs to be done as a community. Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right, so this one I kind of covered already. Trust people to know what they need, trust communities to know what they need, and engage them in the process, right? This is one that was conventional environmental solutions often overlook what's most needed at the moment, which is to repair relationships between people and between people and the earth. Black and Indigenous people of color have legitimate reasons for fear and mistrust. Their shared experiences demonstrate the harmful impact of exploitation and extraction of humans and natural resources. So in the 24 hours of training, we were really able to dig deep in and around all this work. And so this was one of the takeaways. Food justice. Food justice is social justice, right? So this is one that we could see, and this impacted sort of folks that people didn't expect, right? If you think back to the height of the pandemic, folks that were considered middle class and doing just fine were in the lines for the food pantry, right? That everybody felt the pandemic in a way that they didn't expect. And it shifted people's stability, right? So food access was one of the ones that came up, right? And one of the things that we spent a lot of time on, which we don't have time tonight, is the difference between food access, food security, and food sovereignty, right? So having access to food is, getting food into people's homes, right? Food security is knowing that where that food's coming from, knowing it's going to be culturally relevant, know it's something that you can actually use, that you know how to cook it, that it's going to be healthy for your family, right? So it has to be culturally relevant, it has to be usable and accessible. And then food sovereignty is where Bridge really likes to aspire to get us all to, which is where people are agents of their food network and their food sources, right? So we're really about decentralizing food access and food systems so that communities can feed themselves, plant the food they want to plant, grow the food they want to grow, create their own businesses. And so that this is a big conversation, but this is a piece that we spend a good deal of time on. And Bridge's mutual aid program is rooted in that, of which we have at least 50 Great Barrington families in that program, and there are many other ones happening. around this.
And Gwendolyn, preservation of the food too. That was a big thing.
Yeah. Yes. Learning how to preserve the food and having the resources and tools to do that. So climate change concern exists in all communities. So again, we've talked about this already. This has the, thinking about how people respond to climate change differently across different cultures. One of the great moments when we all convened was when some of the ways that some of our newer populations in the Berkshires have lived in their other countries actually are sources of wisdom and knowledge that we need in New England as global warming happens, right? And there was sort of a surprise that they had ideas and strategies already in place. And so that was one of our good learning moments about the value of being in a mutual exchange with communities that are on the outside, because there's actually wisdom to be shared back and forth. Reliable transportation. So this one shows up, and we'll keep talking about it, but everywhere, any space bridges across the county, transportation is the main conversation. Housing is second contender, but being able to have reliable transportation. And when you think about Great Barrington, it seems like it should be doable, right? But people needing to have access to healthy food, right, and be able to get to it is one of the issues we talked about. And that we need to do the work differently than we've been doing it, right? We talked about possibly doing community forums differently to invite people that feel on the outside. We practiced that last year in the process that we worked on. We had engagement dinners. We had a lot of different ways that we engaged people that don't normally engage with the town. And it was really successful, but continually doing that and continuing to come up with strategies to build trust in community is really essential. So those were the 10 insights. And then I'm going into this piece of how we went from those insights to coming up with what a plan and suggestions might be. So I'm trained in appreciative inquiry, which is look at what's working, look at the strengths, and then build from there. So this is called a SOAR analysis. Most people are familiar with the SWOT analysis, but a SOAR is just more rooted in positive psych. So it's all about strength and resilience and less about threats, if that makes sense. So these are the things that we talked about: climate resilience, action, belonging, healthy living. What are the solutions? Who are the partners? What strategies? That's kind of what we were going for. What we did, what got revised, again in partnership with the Sustainability Committee, Bridge, and the community: strengths, opportunities, aspirations, and results squished together. And we wanted to get to what are some climate resilience and equity outcomes that we'd like to see. So that was what the end result was going to be. And all of this with mutual respect, trust, and safety at the center. This was a through line that we kept saying, this is the most important. This is how people stay in the conversation. This is how we keep communities healthy. This is it. It's to really focus on the mutual respect and the trust and the safety. So in this next part, we're going to talk about what those 4 key ideas were and what are the issues, what existing models exist. And this is where, again, the Sustainability Committee was helpful, along with Maya on my team, of researching models that already exist, what resources are needed. The feasibility projects are kind of what resources already exist in the town that we wouldn't have to be starting from scratch, and then what would be the potential benefit. Again, what would be the equitable climate resilient benefit if we tried some of these. So this is the last piece. This is the most important piece. I took you on a journey to how we got to here, to help you have language, to help you understand some of the experience in the process. And this is the last part. So the 4 areas were transportation, housing, food access, food sovereignty, and open spaces and parks. And there was a question of whether this trust building would be the 5th wheel or whether it would be cutting across. So I have it here as just cutting across, right? That's where we landed. So shared transportation is one of the areas where we figured we could come up with some solutions. And the key issues in this area are the accessibility of the vehicles, or whatever the vehicles, for lack of a better term, right? The cost, seasonal differences in what types of vehicles we would need, right, in the different seasons in the Berkshires, and who would run it. So those are some of the key issues when we think about how would we get to shared transportation. Some of the existing examples from other areas are bike sharing, scooter sharing. So those are things that seemed like they might be able to be transferred to what we could do in the Berkshires. Some of the necessary resources to do that in Great Barrington would be money, right? For who's going to manage it, however that needs to be managed in the dispatching. Who's going to maintain those vehicles in the different seasons and at the different sites? Where would those host sites be, and what types of vehicles would that be, and who's going to pay for those and get those there, right? So what felt feasible, right, and this again is in partnership with the Sustainability Committee, is a possible ride share or an augmentation of a ride share that already exists, and a neighborhood riding board. And Steph and I were talking, like maybe that already exists loosely, lightly, in the Great Barrington Community Board. Maybe somebody can post, hey, I need a ride to such and such, and maybe that can get more formalized, right? But that's something that's not a big cost, something that someone could steward and have in our community more formally. The potential benefit: reduced emissions, reduced household costs of either whether it's health costs or transportation costs. Community networks would be built, and there'd be more social awareness built of who's in need and who's around to be supportive. So that was the transportation area. And then in housing, this is a conversation which, again, remember we did this a year ago. So all the stuff that's been happening lately happened afterwards. I just want to say, as I was preparing these slides, I'm like, oh boy. So this was a year ago. But here, some of the key issues were use of and access to town-owned land and buildings, right? So do we have access to it? How can we get access to it? Who would be in charge of that? Who would maintain it? So that was a big question. And then increasing housing prices for long-term rentals due to short-term rentals. So right, the concern over a year ago was that prices would go up for long-term rentals if we continue to bring in short-term rentals, right? And that would further displace people in our community, right? I have to say, I'm going to pause here and just say, from our vantage point, again, working directly with vulnerable community members, people have been displaced, and they continue to be displaced right out of their homes due to the crisis migration that's happening. And so this was sort of in the concern phase when we did this research, and then now we know what's happening in our community. Existing examples to address housing: emergency rental assistance, new affordable rentals, tiny houses came up, and different pathways to wealth building, home ownership, gaining access to land. Another thing, or land trusts could also be up here. Necessary resources, existing CPA funds. And can one of you tell me what CPA funds is? I don't remember. It was in my notes, but what is a CPA fund? Do you know?
Community Preservation Act.
That makes very lot of sense. Okay, so existing CPA funds. Construct is a great partner. CDC would be a great partner. And again, centering the voices of non-homeowners, because again, lots of ideas, lots of vision, lots of dreams would be coming from that community of people that aren't homeowners or experiencing, unstable housing, right? Some of the feasible projects there you could have, and again, this is feasible projects meant, this is doubled, I'm sorry. Tax incentive for renting out long-term at affordable rates. So providing a tax incentive would be something that could happen. Potential benefit would be reduced emissions, household costs, better health access, community network, social awareness. Same. No, I messed up my slide here. Jump down here. Increase housing opportunities, safety, permanence, and belonging, reduce transportation costs, and reduce homelessness and displacement. And again, this displacement is what we've seen quite a bit due to the crisis migration to our area. And homelessness looks different in our area, but it's not non-existent, right? So I think just thinking about the vulnerability in housing and how it's increased over time is really important. So I want to pause before I go into the next two. So we just did transportation and housing. They're always the top two contenders in most of our communities in Berkshire County. But are there any thoughts or questions to what I had on those slides? Like about because this is where there's sort of direct asks of the select board in which you could steward and what can be thought about as solutions. So
Yeah, I just found it interesting that short-term rentals was flagged a year ago, so I didn't realize that. So it's nice to know that we're talking about it.
yeah. Yeah.
I guess I've had several conversations just about transportation, being on job sites and stuff, and a lot of different crews, they do have carpooling going on and stuff. And I mean, a lot of it would be impossible because we work on the outskirts, Mount Washington, Alford, so obviously the B bus wouldn't be going through there, but, just for example, painters and stuff along that crew, they have to, I was just having this conversation the other day, they just there's a lot of carpooling going on in company vehicles to help that situation. But even in, I have a person that rents from me, used to live in a place I had in Pittsfield, and he would always struggle with the B bus because a lot of the work was down here. And so he would rush to meet, it was like a 5:30 in the morning bus in Pittsfield to get down to Great Barrington by like 8:00. And he would have to do transfers in Lee, and
Yeah.
And then if he,
It's $5.
missed it trying to get home or standing out in the rain or trying to get to the bus stop in the rain, like you were saying, it was struggles like that. And, it's just, it's a hard thing to fix because of our numbers, I guess you would say, just lack of population or and then like the bike share and the scooter and stuff, you're still getting soaked on a rainy day, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
those are hard questions for an area where we're in, where population and everything affect that, right? Because you get on the B bus, which I've been on a handful of times recently, that there's not a lot of people on them, so it's hard to ask that to expand when ridership isn't always where it needs to be, I guess, to make it feasible. So
Yeah. It's true.
It's the same way with school buses.
right.
They're not full to capacity either. You have few students on those buses.
Yeah.
I just had a question. I was curious because I had lived in rural Ireland, and they had a lot of issues with social isolation and people being way out and feeling very isolated. And there's a lot of issues with suicide and just people feel a lack of connection. So I'm just curious, do you see that here, or do we feel, even though it's such a rural environment, that we don't see that that's an issue here?
We found the reason why we got so much into mutual aid is because we thought we had a pretty good pulse in between the great organizations that we have, like VIM and Construct, that we thought going into the pandemic, we knew what was needed in Great Barrington. And then I would say I'm talking Great Barrington to Sheffield now. And it wasn't true. So there were, some of our constituents reached out saying, hey, I'm just making it up, but say somebody was working for a small business, that small business owner couldn't understand how to access PPP loans or like what to do. And so that they were losing their job. And so then families just lost, both incomes in an instant. But then those families that knew us introduced 2 to 3 other families that we didn't know about. Right. So that's what happened within a month. We had maybe 27 families reach out to us. And within a month, we had 120 families that were like, severely, impacted, and there are different reasons why some of them weren't affected, right? So some of them Black elders that don't usually use programming, that support themselves within their communities. Again, if you go back to those numbers we talked about at the beginning, you can start unpacking reasons why, right? But those sort of isolated communities, then you get to immigrant communities where documented, undocumented, if you use public charge, if you use, services, it affects your immigration process, right? So people were afraid to reach out for help because they didn't want their immigration process disrupted, right? So there's a misunderstanding that it's just about a certain subset of immigrants, but that's not true. Like I'm talking people of all different, just like I'm saying folks that were securely middle class and pantry lines, there were folks that were, professional tracked folks of immigrant status that were just nervous to use the services because of what that impact would be, right? So there was sort of an illusion around who was getting isolated, who was getting displaced. And then in that, we found people we just didn't know that literally, were watching on the news and were terrified and wouldn't leave the house with their children. So we developed some stronger partnerships with CHP and some other people to really reach out. But I would say still, there are probably isolated families that still don't trust systems for good reasons and for lack of understanding and lack of relationship. But I certainly believe in my time of running Bridge that there's more of what we don't think is here than was here, right? Everything I studied, in school turned out that those issues, like within my first 2 to 3 months of being a medical interpreter, I saw those issues in our community. And they continue to be here, like trafficking and different things like that. And I believe that we have issues that, like under the radar that we have to deal with.
Yeah. Because I remember in Ireland, we used to adopt neighbors, and we would have a good neighbor, and everyone was aware of the houses that you really didn't see them come out, or they didn't go to church or anything, and so we would go check on them. So I'm just wondering if there's a need for that. So thank you.
So. I think that's good. Yeah.
And Gwendolyn, I think it was because of the trust in that initial, right when the pandemic hit, because there was so much trust built in Bridge through the different programmings, the women to women, they were able to reach out to Bridge at that time when it was so needful, and their friends and relatives. But because they weren't going to, if they didn't know you or they didn't have no relationship, no way. But because Bridge had built through the years, they were able to reach out and feel safe.
Yeah. So this is interesting timing with doing this grant, because we had started working on it pre-pandemic, and then we did a lot of the work at the onset of the pandemic. So just the idea of talking about vulnerability was like, in 3D for us at the time. So that got a lot of quote unquote good information for this project. Just moving along. Food access and food sovereignty. I talked about this a little bit, the difference between access, security, and sovereignty. It's been a big area. The key issues Stephanie mentioned earlier: how to preserve food, but also storage space for that food, and then kitchen space for the prep. There was an idea that there was concern about staffing community garden spaces and who would maintain them, either volunteer capacity or municipal staff capacity. Some existing examples, again, not necessarily in our area, but that would work, are use of town-owned land or private land, personal gardens being installed, and garden shares happening. Some of the resources that would be needed would be that access to the land, the startup costs for seeds, training for people how to run their gardens or farms, staffing for those who have the need but not the time because they're working or doing other things that they need to do for themselves or their family. And then also the resources is the volunteers for the distribution. And again, these are things that we're seeing play out right now. Some of the feasible projects are having land donated, right? Or having the town offer land, having kitchen spaces donated or shared from some of the community centers, churches, and different spaces that exist. It was shared with us that the town had a grant to do the study of the town land, which I believe is underway for a community food project. Some of the other ideas is a walkable hub for recycling. Another idea that came out of our Bridge constituents was labeling native plants and herbs so that people understood what were our natural resources in our area. And then also there was an idea of having a compost drop off. And so these all felt like things that could happen, Some of the benefits would be reduced food costs, increased access to healthy food, healthier families, improved overall community connection, and again, the way to preserve food. And that would make less waste. So I'm going to skip this for a second. And then the last area was parks and open spaces. So some of the key issues here was there's a lack of knowledge of where these parks were. I remember Chris told us the number, and we were all surprised at how many parks actually existed in Great Barrington, and how conveniently they're located. He said within 5 to 10 minutes of almost all Great Barrington residences. So one of the key issues are these spaces welcoming? There were stories shared amongst the constituents about folks telling individuals that they didn't belong in those spaces, that they, or not feeling welcome in other ways. Some of the existing examples of what's worked in other spaces is bilingual signage, welcoming people, multilingual signage, spaces that exist to serve communities and desires. So just having space that's designated as community space, right? Necessary resources, the town has funds right now, we were told, for some new parks and improvements. And again, that there are lots of parks already around. So that signage thing really grew legs because the parks are there. How do we put some signs, maybe make them a little safer, a little more inviting, so that people begin to utilize that space. Some of the feasible projects were, again, improve parks and playgrounds, make the spaces accessible, create learning environments in those spaces. Berkshire National Resources Council does a good job at this, and we just really were excited about, again, how we can teach people about place, and knowing it, being connected to place creates a sense of belonging. So it would really serve the trust building and the relationship building too. We could purchase land for additional parks and spaces, and then the idea of creating a welcoming town green or gathering space for all. All those things felt like ideas that came up that were possible to do with the resources that the town already has access to. And some of the benefits would be being able to use those cooling spaces for in the global warming conversation, to be able to get in the water, to swim. That was a big one with the youth participating, is just, where are all the places that they could swim and stay cool that way, but also providing shade for folks that don't have shade where they live. The trees capture carbon. The open space can absorb some of the flood threats that we experience in our area and some of the heavy rain. And the space, obviously, again, creates those healthy communities that we talked about earlier, and a sense of belonging, a place for recreation, community gathering, education, and festivals. So those are the 4 areas that came out as ways to address climate resilience in our community. I don't know if there are any questions or around those last 2, food security or parks and open spaces. Thoughts, reflections, or comments?
Yeah, I had a question. I know, like in, I guess, maybe in more European cities, they have a lot of opportunities for particularly seniors or anyone to play, let's say, dominoes or shuffleboard or cards or, in parks. I'm just wondering, have we ever thought about that? And I'm thinking of connection and a desire for connection and community. So just curious.
I like that idea. I think that was kind of the idea. People were thinking of sort of a vibrant town where everybody belonged. And yeah, it's fun.
And actually, way back in the 80s, late 70s, 80s, they did play cards down there by where that new jewelry store is. Beatrice used to be in there, but that new jewelry store is in there. Yeah. And they did play cards down there of community, of color, with play cards and and they built that community down there.
Yeah, it'd be great to rejuvenate that.
Yeah, I think the list of parks and where they are again would be nice, because I don't think people don't have any idea what the parks are. So maybe even a park day or something. But
that'd be nice. That's one of the things we're working on in this CARE GB Part 2 is bringing the training back with all the findings. And again, this is distilled down. There's tons of pages of more ideas and things, but we were thinking about doing an Earth Day celebration to kind of say, hey, here are the parks, to release the list of parks and maybe choose 1 or 2 to do some events at. One of the ones that we heard about that seemed appealing to the younger people was the Old Maids, which we'd like to change the name to be more culturally competent. But Old Maids over in Housatonic, is a spot that's like a swimming hole and a nice green. There's many places like that apparently.
When it might be good to go to the park department, which I'm on, because Old Maids is closed. It's not a swimming area anymore. So but it might be because bilingual signs is a great idea. And instead of taking on the load yourself, share some of it with the Parks Department. Bring some of the ideas and see what they'll do. I mean, bilingual signs that I would think could be done in weeks.
Then a list would be done.
I like that.
There's a list, I believe, on the town website. There's definitely a list in the master plan.
Put one in the library. Put one where people actually go. Maybe you can have.
How do you, DeGarfield, until you know there isn't one there, let's not assume there isn't one there. There probably is because the master plan's in the library. There in parks would be great because we're always trying to find ways for people to use the parks and trying to help people.
Yeah.
Maybe if I pay.
What?
They have it in the master plan, except I don't think. I'm not trying to say. I just think let's make it access easily. Everyone doesn't go to the library and looks at the master plan. I don't know 5 people looked at the master plan, other than maybe the people here. So I'm just saying, why not one day have it in the shopper's guide, crying out loud, or something accessible to everyone that we're going to look at.
Yeah, great idea.
Yeah, this is great. That's what we were hoping, that some of this stuff wouldn't cost a ton of money. Like, obviously, we would love people to donate land or the town to help people have access to land and buildings, but some of this stuff felt like it could be done relatively easily. So the signage, even about the plants, and then also, I like that idea of a nice inviting poster in the library, and then in the shopper's guide or whatever else. I think those things they feel like doable, right? Any other ideas?
Just again, coming back to the parks, and this might cost money, but again, with benches and things, I find that a lot of benches are so spread out. And if you want, like, I was in Fuel last week or 2 weeks ago, and the quilting club of South Berkshire was meeting there, and there was about 35 people showing their quilts. And it just reminded me that if once the weather gets nicer, to have some kind of seating outside in a park that's closer, that people can interact. And again, I'm coming back to this thought of having a place that people can play games and interact. Because some of the benches, and they're very spread apart, and maybe you have a one person or 2 people, but to have kind of a group, and again, this costs money, but it's just, I guess it's more for the Parks and Rec department.
There's Great Barrington's been very generous with the parks. And if people have ideas, go to the Parks Department, and I'm sure a lot of those can be done.
Great.
I think so. I think Chris has us on a traveling tour, and I think you're on it.
Terrific.
Yeah. All right. So last piece. When we polled people after we did all this work, we're like, we wanted to keep the community engagement up, and we asked people what was most important and where they'd like to show up. And I just want you to look at this data, right? So some of the most important things, housing and transportation, right? Food access, and then going down the list. And then where people would stay involved, where you could get a community swell of engagement, would be in the things on the right-hand side. Housing, the health, the community health, like food access. So I just thought this was really good. So these are from the people that we're meeting. So can you do me a favor, everybody? There's still some people left in the audience. We're almost done. But just sort of rank from here, like what seems the most important of that list, and then what, So this left side is not so urgent, and this is the most essential need. So it goes from not so urgent over to urgent. Would that make sense? Can you guys get in there? The Menti, I don't know if you remember the number.
Do you want us to go into Menti, or can we just talk?
You can talk. I like the Menti because it gives us data for later. Both.
Okay.
What do you say?
We can, I see. We can just do sliders. That's nice.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like building trust and inclusion is such a foundational requirement that you have to kind of do that. As you said, it's kind of one of these.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but obviously housing.
Yeah. You got 3 of you in the Menti. You can see. Anyone else want to share out loud? There's 4. All right.
I mean, we could make an argument for any one of these as being a 5.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's really nice is that what I feel good about is this project was really community based, right? We weren't just consultants coming in and telling you what to do. This is a result of community people speaking, and talking and working alongside the town, your staff and committee representatives. So it's good information, right? It's good reflection of where people's thinking was and where people's energy is. Yeah. So I think the last piece, this is what we submitted for the report at the end, Bridges recommendations. So again, the signage at the parks translated, edible plants, native plants, climate information, local history of the parks, like how did they get their names, et cetera. So they were educating people and again, creating that sense of belonging. The park map, park tours, there's a lot of park stuff. Increased access at this place here, Satane. Ongoing training and conversation with town and community. The community forums to follow up on these recommendations. The raised beds conversation, I think some of this is being taken up with the other groups that are, I can't remember the names of the committees, but I think these conversations are happening through the town. Increased fresh vegetable access through CSAs and just supporting the farms and the farmers markets and helping them be inclusive and welcoming. Increased access to food storage, like we said, and continue community education on the local risks of climate change. So in that signage, as well as sort of the history and what's there, you could also, start sharing facts about climate change, what people can do to stay cool and what people can do to stay warm when they need to stay warm, sort of kind of, making those open spaces that we're talking about also spaces where people learn. So those are the ideas that came out of the work. And I can ask you this question or you can put it in the Menti, but which one of those community suggestions interests you for climate resilience? So there were a lot of suggestions you heard, but which one can you feel like you could sink your teeth into? These are my concluding questions.
I love the educational part, because just from what you've presented today or tonight, any kind of education that ties into whether you're in an open space and you're reading about climate change or resilience, it's just to tie the place to something that's educational at the same time is interesting.
I think community engagement, somebody said it earlier, that sort of is a precursor to almost everything else.
Yeah.
Knowing who is here and just by engaging, more people will feel, I assume, more comfortable being involved and talking.
Yeah.
I would say, and I could be completely off on this question slightly here, but the part I've been learning about, I've been trying to help out a bit with some farmers markets and just how certain organizations are helping, through offering money and incentives with SNAP and stuff like that, and how they're trying to get more healthier food to people, that can't always afford to get it, and as opposed to them, being stuck with the unhealthy food, just because in this area, obviously, we're very lucky with all the farms that we have. I mean, there could be more, but we're the grand scheme of things, we're in a pretty lucky area for that, and just how the outreach of that and how we can make it better is the stuff that I've been interested in trying to help recently. So
That's great. And that's good. Just so that's, you're hovering in the food security space versus food access, right? Food access is just getting food to people. Security is, again, healthy, culturally relevant, all the things you just talked about. Any other thoughts? Any commitments? What can we follow up on? Do you have any ideas what we can follow up on? I heard Steve invite us to the parks group.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
we're doing that. Eric's working with the food.
And just outreach to people, letting them know what's available and how they can obtain whatever they need. And there's a lot of folks who don't know what's out there and what they have access to. I think community reach out is good. Getting the word out would be very good.
Yeah. I think that just letting people know. And the 14 mandates of cultural competence for public health, the 14th one is let people know what you're doing, right? So like just almost not even changing anything, but just messaging and teaching about what already exists is a big leap, right? And then you can come up with, access to land and buildings and things like that. But just that first step of just letting people know you care, letting people know that they belong, right? Teaching people where things are, teaching people how to live more, in harmony with the land and the earth in our area, what that looks like, what that means, how that's been done historically and culturally. Those pieces are doable, right? With organization and not necessarily with like huge bunches of money and policy changes. But so there's ways in which you can work towards the bigger things.
Yeah, and like Ed was saying, if we can build trust and get those connections, because right now in that first part of this whole training, there's a whole group of people that aren't even on that the thing for Great Barrington. The number's 0 there, and yet we know the people do exist here. So building that trust and getting those connections to that community will make it a lot easier.
Thank you. Here's our footnote. Our bridge staff and youth leaders and board that were watching this talked about a recycling program. There was a lot of Amazon ordering during the pandemic, and there was a concern about how we can maybe go porch to porch and pick up recycled Amazon boxes, because there was so much of that happening for people. And how do we get people to refocus on shopping locally, educating about land trusts, and then the bike, moped, scooter share was exciting to some of the young people. So that was our footnote. So this is the last slide. One word experience for your training this evening. How was it?
Beneficial.
Thank you.
Inspirational and gratitude.
Thank you.
Do you mind if it's more than one word?
No.
It's really impressive how well you did this, given that it's Zoom and this would be so much better in a room, I assume.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. This isn't my favorite way to do a seminar either.
Yeah.
So, but it's remarkable how much you got across given that handicap. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I found it educational and got me got mind thinking on a lot of issues there. So say educational.
Thank you. Garfield.
Thinking still.
Thinking.
That's not my one word. He's good though. I'll stick with thinking. No.
All right. Thank you. And Mark, do you have any comments? I don't know. I'm quiet over there. No.
Gwen, thank you very much.
All right. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Always terrific. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you, Steph.
All right. Take care. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you. Good night.
Night. Okay, citizen speak time. Select board time. Garfield.
Nothing.
Thank you. Eric.
Nothing. Thank you.
Ed.
Nothing.
Lee.
Nothing.
And I have nothing. Media time. By unanimous consent, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good night. See you Wednesday.
Bye.
Bye.